Hello and welcome, my name's Dychronic, and today we're going to be taking a look at my top 10 PvE specials in Destiny 2 Lightfall. And of course, as always, I have made a spreadsheet for this video, which obviously includes the damage testing for all the different weapons I was considering for this video. And that can still be found at my Discord server, link in the description down below on the channel #SpreadsheetsDocs. And as you well know, there's often cute animals near the beginning of my videos, and you can obviously say aw because they're very adorable. And they have a message for you. No, that's too cringe. They don't have a message. I have a message for you. These videos would not be possible without your support on Patreon. I tried, I just couldn't do it. Because really, these spreadsheets and these videos take a long time. So if you like them, and you want to see them continue, check them out, link in the description down below. Without further ado, let's go ahead and get into it. On screen right now, this is my spreadsheet. Dark theme, color-coded, recommendations, perk information, catalyst information for all the different weapons I was considering, as well as the rankings. And of course, on the right side, the DPS calculations, which there's a lot of complicated stuff here. And if you don't know the spreadsheets and it seems confusing, check out a tutorial to my spreadsheets, which should be linked in the description down below. And there were a few things that have changed since the last time I'd done this spreadsheet. First of all, the kinetic change, where kinetic weapons are now doing more damage than their stasis kinetic slot and strand kinetic slot alternatives, as well as the sniper change, the fourth horseman issues, etc. Right before I get into it, I just wanted to talk about a few honorable mentions. First up, the Merciless is actually a very good weapon, very close to being in the top 10 in my opinion, very underrated, but you can see here the DPS and full ammo damage just for having the weapon is pretty darn good. The catalyst is not really that important. After that, also another honorable mention to the fourth horseman, currently doing a glitched amount of damage, which I cannot really test it right now, and I did not want to include a glitched weapon in the top 10 because they're probably going to be changing it. But right now it's doing more damage than it should. And the last honorable mention to the Orvandil FR6 as well as the Deliverance, both of which are fusion rifles in the first slot that have the ability to have chokelit, which is a very, very good perk, and I recommend it. Without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. At number 10 on our list, we have the lightweight frame grenade launchers, as well as the one aggressive frame, which is going to be the Wilderflight, which is that little split frame thing, which obviously does a lot better in most of the ways. And many of you may be surprised to see that there's no wave frames on this list. In my opinion, wave frames are much more of an ad-killing weapon, and they do it pretty well, but at the higher level, even at the raid levels, they don't really do that well. And the reason why I picked the lightweight frames are a couple of different things. First of all, they have pretty good full ammo damage and good ammo economy, so they can be used pretty consistently for not only AoE blasts, but for some decent damage to majors. And probably one of the more useful options is that they can have something called blinding grenades, which essentially tells all non-mini boss or non-boss enemies to just stop what they're doing for a few seconds, which can really help you out to get you out of a pickle. On top of it, obviously, again, AoE explosions can be used at pretty much any range and is very easy to understand. And these lightweight frame grenade launchers can be found in a lot of different locations, specifically the Wilderflight from the Spire of Dungeon. Following that at number 9, we have a bit of an eclectic group of snipers, the Succession, the Predate's Revenge, and the Cloud Strike, for a lot of different reasons. First of all, obviously kinetics did get buffed for damage in general, specials even more, which is why Predate's and Succession was chosen, and Cloud Strike just does a lot of damage with its high fire rate and of course those lightning strikes. Beyond that, Predate's Revenge has the ability to get Frenzy plus Rewind rounds, which allows it to get to a quote-unquote 14 magazine before needing to reload, on top of rapid fire snipers in the mid-season buff getting a reserve buff, a magazine buff, as well as a recoil buff. And just so you know, there are plans for next season to get a damage buff to all snipers except for Izanagi's Burden, which obviously makes sense. So snipers may come up a bit more in the meta. However, rapid fires often suffer from one major thing, which is going to be their full ammo damage. The 72 RPM aggressive frames, like Succession, usually have better full ammo damage. And Succession also has a great combination of perks like Firing Line plus Reconstruction, getting it to an 8 magazine. All of which need to be hitting headshots the entire time with their 3 to 5 times multiplier, because headshots are king when it comes to snipers. So a Divinity Bubble is almost always used if you're using snipers. After that, at number 8, we have the Slug Shotguns. In my opinion, a very underrated weapon type that can do some pretty good damage, especially if you're getting those headshots, because they have a near 2 times crit multiplier. And again, we do have a kinetic version in the form of Fortissimo, which got that buff this season and still doing some pretty good DPS, hanging up with the top dogs. Beyond that, things like First and Last Out, Heritage, Sojourner's Tale, and of course Granoa's Axe. All of which having some pretty decent perks that can help you in PvE and are obviously much longer range than all of the other shotgun options, and allows you to stay out of melee slam range for most bosses. Following that at number 7, we have the Divinity Trace Rifle, an exotic that's used used in pretty much every raid for a lot of different reasons. Although it did get nerfed this season, no longer has the maximum weaken debuff. And if you don't know, the way this weapon works is it's a trace rifle. When you shoot at a target for enough time, it weakens the target at 15%. Currently, the highest weaken effect are things like the tether or tractor cannon at 30%. And with that weaken effect, Divinity also creates a guaranteed crit bubble on the center of the target, which is much easier to hit for the aforementioned snipers and thinner fusion rifles. And it's also overload rounds, meaning that you can actually stun overload champions, meaning that it has a lot of different uses. And even if you do end up putting a tether or a tractor cannon on the target, Divinity can be really useful for that guaranteed crit hit. However, there's a couple things that do bring it down. First of all, obviously not the best weaken effect in the game. Secondly, we don't really need built-in champion rounds nearly as much as we used to. Not only can we literally suspend every champion in the game, all of those subclass verbs makes it really easy to affect champions in a lot of different ways. We don't really need things like Ariana's Vow, Arbalest, Divinity, or Bastion anymore. That being said, Divinity is still a great option, and it's actually worth getting. Following that at number 6, we have the Izanagi's Burden, which is the absolute glass cannon of a weapon. You can fire 5 total ×4 honed edge shots with this weapon that do really high damage, and obviously while you're reloading, you don't have to be out in the open, making it a safe option to peek shoot with. But frankly, most of the time, Izanagi's Burden is usually being used in raids in a combination with your legendary rocket to do supplemental damage. Again, as long as you have that div bubble or you can hit your shots. But it can also be used to melt down champions. You stun a champion, you put a div bubble, or you get that headshot. Izanagi's Burden kills and hits that thing very quickly. And if you have a Wither Horde already on your team affecting a boss, you need a different option. Something like Izanagi's fits that role. TLDR, it's an incredible burst option at pretty much any range, and it's a kinetic, meaning that it got a little bit better. Following that at number 5, in my opinion, the best legendary shotgun option is gonna be the lightweight frames, including things like Reese Walker from Iron Banner, Seven Seraph from obviously World Drops and a long time ago, and Without Remorse, which came out from Haunted, which I believe is a World Drop now. All of which have some of the best DPS of all of the legendary shotguns and a pretty good full ammo damage. And in my opinion, that nice middle zone of fire rate without going too crazy, and it's also built in lightweight, which means you can run faster with it, and it's always better to run faster. Unless you're running at a brick wall, which I would recommend running slower. TLDR, if you like shotguns, these are some of the best. Following that at number 4, in my opinion, the best shotgun for special ammo weapons, we have the Conditional Finality. Finally, a Root of Nightmares raid exotic that I actually want to use. And this thing has some pretty big impact. If you don't know how it works, it has 2 shots in a magazine. The first one, if you hit all the pellets, will actually freeze the target, and the second shot, when you hit all the pellets, will ignite the target, which obviously shatters it from the first shot. Couple that with a pretty fast reload time and 18 total shots, and it has some of the best full ammo damage of any shotgun in the game, and technically the highest DPS of any special weapon in the game, again barring the 4th Horseman glitch. Now that's a pretty powerful weapon! And you also have to consider the fact that freezing, slowing, and igniting targets actually affects champions, including the unstops and overloads. On top of, again, just being able to freeze targets and ignite a target, killing everything around it, is very strong. It's good total damage, it's good DPS, it's great utility, it's a lot of fun, it has great ammo economy, it is a great weapon. The only annoying part is that it's 2 different damage types, stasis and solar, so getting it to work with surge mods doesn't really work well. And if you want to get your hands on this weapon, again, you do have to complete the Root of Nightmares. The final boss is the potential drop chance, and you can have a higher chance if you complete the triumphs on the seal related to this raid. Following that at number 3, we have the Arbalest and the Ariana's Vow, which used to be at number 1 for quite a long time, for almost years at this point, and I still think is an incredible option, but did get relatively pushed back. If you don't know, both the Arbalest and Ariana's Vow were previously used, for the most part, for their anti-barrier rounds, which are obviously guaranteed and consistent from season to season, meaning the artifact does not dictate what weapons you use. You can still use Ariana's and Arbalest. Furthermore, a very long range set of weapons with good full ammo damage and good DPS, as well as great utilities in the form of auto-loading, shield disorient, and extra damage perks where Ariana's just has to keep getting headshots and the Arbalest just has to break a shield, which also includes the barrier shield. Now, the one thing I would say that does hold them back and did relatively push them back is, again, we don't really need anti-champion rounds nearly as much as we used to with all the subclass verbs, which also include certain weapons like Chill Clip, and of course, again, Suspend solves every champion of the game. We don't see it as often. But if you find yourself in a raid with legendary rockets and somebody else is using Wither Horde and you don't like Izanagi's, Arbalest and Ariana's is actually a good option for damage output from a good range. In essence, they can be used in pretty much every activity for pretty much every reason, except for stunning overload champions. What a shame. Arbalest is going to be a random exotic drop, and the Ariana's Vow is going to be from the exotic archive. Following that at number 2, in my opinion, one of my favorite weapon types in the game, we have the rapid fire fusion rifles. And in my opinion, the best fusion rifle archetype by far for a lot of reasons. First of all, the best DPS of any of the fusion rifles other than Merciless, which is an exotic. The best full ammo damage of any of the fusion rifles, again, other than Merciless. And the only thing that it lacks compared to the other fusion rifles is gonna be range. And frankly, the rapid fire fusion range is enough to handle most things you need it to, on top of also being faster fire rate, meaning that it's usually easier to understand and easier to control. And my personal favorite is obviously gonna be Riptide because it can have auto-loading plus chill clip, although it is a crucible drop and takes a long time to get with a large, very saturated pool, is very, very good. I personally use Cartesian Coordinate, which is solar, with my Gallahorn builds for DPS because Gallahorn and Cartesian are both solar damage and get affected by the solar surge. And the newest weapon to this season, we finally have an arc version in the form of Iterative Loop, which has the Volt Shot, which is kind of fun if it'll just freaking drop from me. And a lot of these can be found in a lot of locations. Riptide from Crucible, Cartesian's probably World Drop, No Composures from the Archive. Finally, at number 1, in my opinion, the best PvE special in the game, maybe even the best PvE weapon in general in the game, we have the Witherhoard. And it has been one of the best weapons for an extremely long time, finally overtaking Ariana's and Arbalest because of, the non-need for champion rounds, and this thing is an absolute beast. First of all, it doesn't technically have very high DPS. You can see it's actually at the bottom of the list, but you don't actually have to have it out while you're using it. You fire it once, put it in your pocket. If you have auto-loading, it automatically reloads itself. You start firing with a rocket or a heavy machine gun, you swap back to it, it's automatically reloaded, and you're doing damage the entire time. On top of the fact that you can shoot it at the floor, and it does AoE damage to all the targets around it. You can stick a target and go into cover, allowing you to obviously do damage while not being vulnerable. And when it comes down to it, it has some of the highest, if not the highest full ammo damage in the game other than Grand Overture. Even in its worst form, the floor shot is still better than every other option in the game. And of course, the most obvious use that we have seen these days is going to be with Starfire Protocol, which gets more fusion grenades and an Empowering Rift when you're doing weapon damage, which includes Witherhoard. So you shoot at the target with Witherhoard, and you're just continuously throwing grenades, firing rockets, doing whatever you want, and of course, again, it auto-loads in your pocket. But even without Starfire Protocol, and even after Starfire Protocol gets nerfed, which obviously it's gonna get nerfed, Witherhoard's still gonna be an incredibly good option. I would say the one thing I could say that is a downside is that heavy machine guns have solved our full ammo damage needs, but we don't usually need Witherhoard as much as we did before. It's still an incredible option, and it does require special ammo, not heavy ammo. And of course, a big shout out my patrons on Patreon. Without their help, this really would not be possible. Specifically, a big thank you to Mama Dad, Kipper Shaw, Waffle Prez, Joe Bad, Robert Strayer, James Osler, Ethan Hodgin, Monty Armstrong, Monday, C. Bachmanwitz, Junior Panther, Casey Reagan, Willard Peterson, and Benjamin. Oh, Benjamin, thank you for support on Patreon. Hope you have a fantastic rest of your day. My name is Dychronic, and I'll see you guys on the next one.